Hi, welcome to this cheerful video, why the global economy is collapsing and why it can't be fixed. Economic collapse is an existential and depressing topic. If you're medicated on psychotropic drugs, or if you're depressed, or if you have young children, I do not suggest watching this video. The three main drivers of economic collapse happening on planet Earth right now are 1. Depletion of non-renewable resources worldwide. 2. Biosphere degradation, for example, UVC is now reaching the surface. 3. The anthropogenic ninth mass extinction is at its tail end. Alright, I'll start with the non-renewable resources. There are many opinions as to why the economy is collapsing. On platforms like YouTube, there are thousands upon thousands of videos. Yet virtually all these opinions are like reading a fairy tale, and they have very little basis in reality. Alright, let's get to the bottom of this. In 1972, the report Limits to Growth was published. This report has one major error in it, and I believe this error has been kept in the report to deceive the reader and to make sure the public doesn't panic and figure out what's really going on. When I speak of chromium metal, I'm also implying about 30 other critical minerals which are in the same boat as chromium in a state of depletion. Alright, I'm going to read the lie in this report. In 1972, the amount of chromium reserves was 775 million metric tons, of which 1.85 million metric tons were mined annually. The real, truthful sentence would go like this. In 1972, the amount of shipping-grade chromite ore reserves was 775 million metric tons, from which 6 million shippable-grade chromite ore was mined, from which 1.85 million metric tons of chromium metal was produced. Now I'm going to explain why this is so dire and critical. This is a graph of chromite ore of shippable grade or shipping grade extraction on the red line. I've superimposed the blue line, which is relative human population divided by 1,000, just to show the growth of the human population over the past 120 years relative to the growth of chromite ore extraction. In 1972, it was about 6 million, and then in the past couple of years, it's gone up to over 40 million metric tons of shippable grade chromite ore. This is another graph where it shows the chromium metal production out of the chromite ore. 1972 was about 2 million, close enough to the Limits to Growth paper, and then in 2022 was about 13 million tons of chromium metal. Now this is where the deception begins. This is a graph from Statista, and they take the graph from the United States Geological Survey. This reads the reserves of chromium worldwide from 2010 to 2024. And this is an obfuscation of truth. They're trying to trick the reader into believing this is chromium metal. It's not. It's reserves of shippable grade chromite ore. Now this whole graph is a lie, but what we can infer from this graph is that from about 800 million metric tons of chromite ore in the 70s, the depletion has been catastrophic to about, let's pretend this first tab here is in 2010 is somewhat akin to the truth. They're claiming there's 350 million metric tons of shippable grade chromite ore left on planet Earth. Now if you see in 2023 to 2024 there's a doubling of the reserves. What's been done here is they know how nightmarish the situation is now, and they don't want the public to panic, so they included, in the best way I can explain it, the garbage, unminable ores of chromite. Okay, let's get to the science of it. This is from the United States Geological Survey, and in essence, we'll see the obfuscation of truth here. This is from 2023 and 2024. This is in thousands of tons. So the extraction of shippable grade or shipping grade chromite ore was about 45 million tons, out of which they got about 14 or 15 million tons of chromium metal. Now the third column here is the reserves. It points us to this bullet point number 14, which explains what chromite ore is for the viewer of this video. Units are 1,000 metric tons gross weight of shipping grade chromite ore, which is deposit quantity and grade normalized to 45% chromite, except for the United States and Finland. So the world agrees that in 100 tons of product, if it's 45% chromite, it's called shipping grade chromite ore. And chromite is 68% chromium metal. That's why there's so little chromium metal extracted from chromite ore. Okay, they're claiming there's 1.2 billion metric tons of shipping grade chromite ore. And then they do a switch and bait. And now in the next paragraph, they claim there's 12 billion tons of shipping grade chromite ore. How do they get to this number? It's extremely difficult to find it. I had to use Claude AI, which is one of the better research AIs. And this is the question I had to pose because I just couldn't get through the data and find the articles. So Claude scoured the internet, and this is the question I posed to Claude. World resources of chromite ore are claimed to be 12 billion tons. I misspelled tons here. Can you find the earliest citation of this number, how it was derived? I'm looking for proof. Claude was able to find the proof. I'm going to skip to number 3 here, key point number 3 first. John F. Papp took a research article and he modified it to the article is in key point number 1. It's International Strategic Minerals Inventory Summary Report for Chromium. And this is the article here. This is John F. Papp. In that article, they claim there was 7 billion metric tons of shipping grade chromite ore. John F. Papp, for some reason, upgraded it 12 billion by using substandard deposits. Well, he must obviously be part of the system. Anyways, I'm not going to speculate on what's going on here with people's agendas, but I think they're scared of what's going to happen, and that's understandable. Okay, so important specifications, point number 5. So these articles are not talking about chromium metal, as the limits to growth got wrong and then kept a lie in there. And this is very important to discern. These articles and research papers are specifically talking about shipping grade chromite ore, normalized to 45% chromite content. Now we got to go back up a little bit to a very important key point, the resource classification system. And we're going to focus on R1E, identified deposits with economically explorable resources. Now what does that mean? We have to go further down to this chart here, and this shows the R1E deposit types. There's in 1984 they were claiming there was 1.3 billion tons of stratiform chromite, shippable grade chromite ore, and 155 million tons of podiform. There's a decimal here, so it's not billion tons, it's really 155 million tons. So out of the 7 billion tons, only 1.46 billion tons were of economically viable, mineable ore. Now, this is not even close to truth because stratiform is garbage. It can barely be mined with modern technology, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And we're almost out of podiform in 2026. They've been able to find more, and technology has improved to mine a stratiform, but barely. This is why the 2008 recession began, because the mines began to empty out. The technology wasn't there to mine it, and it was sucking the money from the governments who had to put in massive subsidies to these mines. The whole system started cracking, and people were able to take advantage of it with derivative loans and stuff like that. But that's not the reason why the economy is collapsing or why the recession happened. It's the mining sector is collapsing. All right. Now we're going to ask another question, I asked another question to Claude. What percent of this 12 billion tons is Podiform, or is it better to ask what percent is R1E classification? All right. Podiform represents only 3.5% of total resources. The interesting paradox is that podiform deposits are a tiny fraction of resources but punch above their weight in production, while the massive stratiform deposits contain the overwhelming majority of resources but require significant capital investment to develop, meaning they can't really be developed, not even with our modern technology. We're at the tail end of this catastrophe. And most people will most likely be dead by 2040. Next question, explain how podiform are more economically viable than stratiform. The paradox, South Africa's Bushveld complex contains enough chromite to supply the world for centuries, but much of it sits at the depths that cost more to mine than chromite is currently worth. Meanwhile, small Turkish or Kazakh open pit mines with tiny resources produce profitably because they can dig it up cheaply from the surface. That's only a half truth. We can't really get to the stratiform, and we're at the tail end of this whole disaster. That's true for about 30 critical minerals. All right, this dire information was presented to the public by only 2 authors that I know. The first is Walter Youngquist in his book Geodestinies. It's a long, extensive book, and he influenced Christopher O. Clugston to write his own research books, and he wrote 3 books. I'm going to read 3 quick excerpts from his book Blip, which are very profound in the last chapter. But before I do, I just want to make it very clear to the listener that if we do find more resources and keep this going, it's a conundrum in itself, a self-annihilating paradox. Every elephant is going to be killed. Every rhinoceros is going to be killed. All the whales, the Amazon is going to be completely deforested. All the coral reefs are going to die off. So humanity just doesn't care. Most human beings, I should say, just don't care. And that's extremely sad. All right, this is the very short excerpts from Chris's book, Blip, in the last chapter. It goes by decade, so I'll start. The 2020s, us versus them. The prevailing perspective during the early 2020s. Our goal of universal human prosperity through global industrialism is attainable. There is enough for everybody. Our problem is a broken system, which has been broken since the Great Recession or before. The 2030s, us or them. The prevailing perspective by the early 2030s. The system cannot be fixed because of them. Capitalists, socialists, Christians, Muslims, foreigners, the West, the East, the rich, the poor, the young, the old, whites, blacks, browns, anybody who is not us. There's enough for us, but not enough for them, so they must go, literally. The 2040s, me or you. The prevailing perspective during the 2040s, my problem is you, a resource competitor. As societal institutions, governance, and real wealth creation cease to exist, it will become universally understood that the survival of each individual depends on the elimination of all competitors. And this is in line with what's happening right now in the world. It's pretty sad. In this part of the presentation, I'm going to speak about the destruction of the biosphere and the ninth mass extinction. They're both interconnected and intertwined. I'll treat them as one topic. So it's hard to believe this, but the first scientific study of the atmosphere was undertaken in 1967, the first commissioned scientific study by a government body. There was testing done in the early 1900s, which gave this same result, but it's unbelievable that people had tanks and bombs to slaughter each other, yet didn't have the understanding of what air is. All right, till 1967. All right, so just quickly, when the Europeans came to South America, there was a forest on the eastern shore. This is what the forest looked like. This is what the forest looks like now. Over 90% of it has been destroyed. The Amazon is a wetland, the third biggest wetland in the world, and it's harder to get to, but it's going to get chopped down pretty quick now. With the technology we have to make roads, it's going much faster than it was before. All right, so why hasn't the level of oxygen changed in the atmosphere? The scientific dogma is this. It's a process that takes hundreds of millions of years, and the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere is so massive that it doesn't really matter. If all life disappeared on Earth right now, the atmosphere wouldn't change much. If we burned all the fuels, all gas, the oxygen level would go from 20.9% to 20.8%. It's hard to believe, but that's how much oxygen there is in the air. But deep down inside, I knew this was their explanation and their theory is wrong. So it took a lot of research and thinking about this, how to break through. I had to spend a long time on this. When I did finally break through, I had to check if I was the only person who ever figured this out. Like, it's kind of hard to believe this, but apparently I'm the only one on planet Earth who's done this. So here we go. This is the last question I asked Claude regarding the papers. I'm going to read it to you. Are there any known large-scale studies done on the population sizes relative to each other of life that directly depend on oxygen inhalation, like mammals, life that relies on inhalation and exhalation of oxygen, like trees, because trees exhale oxygen during the daytime and inhale it in the nighttime? That goes for plankton too, pretty much, or similar process. And life that only exhales oxygen in relation to the fluctuations of atmospheric levels of oxygen. I'm looking for the hare and the wolf analogy, meaning that oxygen at 20.9% in the atmosphere is the wolf, and the population sizes of other life forms increase or decrease with slight variations of oxygen levels to maintain the 20.9% atmospheric levels. This is the reply I got. Based on my search, no such studies exist because the physics of atmospheric oxygen regulation makes predator-prey style population oscillations impossible. And I know that's not true, and I'll show you why. Okay, the atmosphere reservoir is massive. Even if all oxygen-consuming life died tomorrow, atmospheric oxygen would take thousands of years to change significantly. All right, so now I'm gonna get to the bottom of this. This is one of the fundamental questions I got to start breaking through. If all the net oxygen production stopped by the living organisms that do so, including trees, but keep their use of oxygen at night, how long would it take for atmospheric oxygen levels to drop to 20% by the respiration of organisms which consume oxygen and by the burning of fuels by humans? And here it is. Take approximately 13 to 14 years to drop to 20, and it would take 40 years to drop to 19.5, where pretty much all mammals die on planet Earth. Okay, however, this is impossible, right? I actually was thinking so hard I forgot that plants don't use the oxygen carbon dioxide to release oxygen. They actually split water. But anyways, that's what hard thinking does. But okay, so let's ask the next significant question. Since now we know that the dogma is not true, that if all life that produces oxygen or photosynthetic life goes extinct, then the atmosphere will change rapidly under ideal conditions, of course. So here's the next question. What short-term biological process would render the oxygen levels too low or too high for mammals to exist? Say if all the insects disappeared or something of the sort. All right. Going down to the bottom line, no short-term biological process could change atmospheric oxygen levels fast enough to threaten mammals. All right, next question then. If UVC at around 253.7 nanometers, which is what's used by mercury lamps to disinfect or destroy the DNA of bacteria, if this UVC reached the planetary surface of intensity 10 microwatt seconds per centimeter squared to reach the planet's surface during the daytime, what would be the effect on photosynthesis globally? This is continuous irradiance for about 6 hours during peak daytime hours. Answer: the scenario would be catastrophic for global photosynthesis and life on Earth. All right, let's get to the conclusion here. Bottom line, this level UVC would essentially terminate photosynthesis at the dominant energy input to Earth's biosphere. It would be an extinction level event. Okay, what if they replaced the 253.7 wavelength with the whole UVC spectrum? Is the outcome more severe or the same? It's 10 to 20% more damaging. However, the last sentence is telling. The difference is academic, like comparing whether a building collapses in 30 seconds or 35 seconds. All right, so this scenario is impossible, right? Well, during the summer of 2025, on the prairies, there were virtually no insects, and myself and my coworker started to notice how brutal the sun was. It was absolutely insane. So I started testing for UVC. The UVB number here is not correct. It's calibrated for a lamp, so don't worry about UVA or UVB. The UVCs during this day was 9 microwatts per centimeter square. So basically, we're screwed. I believe 2026 is going to be the year when food production starts to falter. The AI responses were dramatic. Life is hardy. And however, the insect collapse is catastrophic. There are insects on the Precambrian shield. I know that, and people will say where I live, there's some insects, but for the most part, all of them are gone. Some people blame the chemicals in the air and other things like pesticides. Maybe. I'm sure they have a contributing factor, but it's most likely the UVC that's destroying the insect populations. And I think food production is going to be destroyed over the next 10 years. So along with the catastrophe of mineral depletion, which is going to kill virtually everybody by 2040, we now have a extinction level event with the ozone layer being destroyed. And this is being kept from the public too. The shadow government, the US military, knows full well what's going on. And I'm sure they're just as terrified as anybody else, I guess. I don't know if I'm terrified or not. I'm going to die. It doesn't, whatever. It sucks. I'd like to live to old age, but it is what it is. Now, I do think there is a solution to this, and it's extreme and utterly insane to most people. All right. Last year, satellite imagery discovered that the pyramids at Giza are just a capstone to a massive structure which ascends 2 kilometers down, pillars which go down 2 kilometers. At around 600 meters, there seems to be cubes. So what does this have to do with anything about the environment and oxygen? This machine is on the world reserve currency. In essence, this machine is still working, and it binds the minds of human beings. Human beings worship the machine. But they don't know it. Every parts of government, virtually all judiciary, all businesses are controlled by Freemasons or somebody akin to that. The Masons are essentially human beings who are trapped by the machine. Their minds are locked up. Most of our logos here represent the pyramid or the machine. I don't want to call it the pyramid anymore. Here's the representation of the machine by the Louvre. All right, so what does this have to do with anything? Well, we have words to describe our reality, but these words aren't oftentimes accurate. What is accurate is if an entity lives for 1 million years and it comes to a planet and wants to mine it, the most effective way to do it is to create biological life, which is just smart enough to create the Industrial Revolution and to aggregate minerals. So in essence, factories, everything that we build, buildings with rebar and cars are an aggregation of minerals. Now we're almost at the end and we're almost dead. And once we're dead, all this matter, these metals will be most likely collected and taken off planet. I do believe also that the machine is an IQ test. And this is how the IQ test goes. The Giza plateau here with the pyramids needs to be excavated 2 kilometers down. Once it's excavated, the whole thing gets, explosives are placed on it and the whole thing gets detonated. After that, we wait for the miracle. We'll see if the entities that created us will let us go into the solar system next in our life. If not, it doesn't really matter. We're dead anyways. So, and I don't think this will happen. I mean, it's absurd. The idea is absurd in itself. And once again, I'm the only person on planet Earth who thinks this. Their minds are locked up by the machine. So, in essence, that's it. That's all.